Have you ever wondered if, behind an apparently harmless children's cartoon, there could be something much darker? What if I told you that what was presented to us as a scientific accident actually hides an ancient and extremely dangerous pact? For decades, the Powerpuff Girls have enchanted generations with their vibrant colors, their adventures, and their constant fight against evil. But like in every work, there are details that many haven't noticed, subtle clues, ambiguous dialogues, and symbols that seem to have gone unnoticed even by the most attentive fans. Some theories have started to emerge from the darkest corners of the internet, raising a disturbing possibility. What if the origin of the girls' powers wasn't the result of a laboratory accident, but rather a silent agreement with something that should have never been awakened? After all, who or what is truly Chemical X? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I want to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to deliver these videos to more people, and for me to continue bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. If there's one thing that has always caught attention in the Powerpuff Girls, it's that famous creation formula: sugar, spice, and everything nice, until accidentally, a vial containing the mysterious Chemical X breaks, giving birth to the 3 girls. But there's a detail that almost no one stops to think about. After all, what exactly is this Chemical X? Because think about it, the show never explains it. It simply appears there, inside a vial, in the middle of a home laboratory. Since when does a professor, who looks more like an amateur scientist, store such an unstable substance, with a completely unknown origin? Strange, isn't it? And what's even more curious, is that this has never been treated as something relevant in the show. No episode, no official interview, no behind-the-scenes source has ever bothered to explain where this element came from. Does that seem like a simple oversight to you, or a deliberate omission? It was precisely this lack of explanation that led many pop culture researchers, hardcore fans, and even scholars of symbolism to start digging frame by frame through the old episodes. And it didn't take long for them to notice a disturbing detail. In the exact scene where Chemical X spreads through the lab, a dark, dense smoke appears, something that doesn't match the colorful and vibrant tone of the ingredients used in the experiment. But this smoke isn't just a black stain. When some fans started applying filters, increasing contrast, freezing frames, what they found is, at the very least, unsettling. Shapes that resemble claws, elongated eyes, distorted faces, as if something, or someone, was trying to manifest at that exact moment. Now stop and think. If it were just a coincidence or a joke by the animators, why choose that exact moment? Why, in the explosion that creates the girls, does this very specific representation of something dark appear? Something that doesn't match the rest of the show's aesthetic at all. And it doesn't stop there. When we look at the behavior of Chemical X within the show, it simply doesn't make sense. It's not just a chemical product. It creates life. It grants supernatural powers. Super strength, flight, invulnerability, energy blasts. Something that, if you really think about it, leans more toward magic than science. And since when is a laboratory compound capable of that? And here comes what, for many, is the strangest piece of this puzzle. In some concept art drafts from the series that leaked a few years ago, there's a note that shouldn't be there. It reads, X equals living energy. Source unknown. Non-replicable matter. Living energy? Unknown source? That doesn't sound like science at all. It sounds like something much older and much darker. And it's impossible not to draw a parallel here. Because if you study ancient texts on alchemy, demonology, and even occult traditions, you'll find accounts of substances called dark matter, blood of entities, or essence from lower planes. And interestingly, these substances are always described as capable of creating life, but at a cost. In fact, here's a detail that almost no one notices. The color of Chemical X isn't just any color. It shifts between black, purple, and green. And these 3 colors have very specific meanings in esotericism. Black symbolizes the void, the unknown, death. Purple represents transmutation, the bridge between worlds. And green, the imbalance between the natural and the supernatural. Just a coincidence, or a very intentional choice? Now, pay attention to the effect of the explosion when Chemical X mixes in the experiment. It's not just a flash, it's a very specific sequence. First light, then dense shadow, followed by a strong sound distortion. and then absolute silence. If you've ever read any account of ancient summoning rituals, you know that this description appears over and over, almost like a script of what happens when a breach between dimensions opens. And here's where the question starts to get uncomfortable. Because if Professor Utonium never created Chemical X, where did he get it? How did that vial end up there? Nothing, absolutely nothing, in his background suggests he had the ability to synthesize something like this. It implies that the element wasn't created. It was already there. And more than that, maybe it should never have been used. The final detail that closes this circle of strangeness comes when we notice a direct visual connection between Chemical X and a certain character. The one who, in the show, literally represents absolute evil. Yes, him. Sam couleur palette. Same black smoke. Same distorted sound whenever he appears. The question that remains is inevitable. Could Chemical X actually be an extension or a fragment of this being? And if that's the case, what exactly did Professor Utonium bring into the world when he broke that vial? Now, if Chemical X already carries all these strange signs, the question that naturally arises is, who or what is that villain who, since his very first appearance, made it clear that he's no ordinary enemy? Yes, we're talking about him. Him, an entity that never received a real name, never had an explained origin, and in the show is simply referred to as him. Since his first appearance, him has never behaved like the other villains in the city of Townsville. While all the others had basic motivations, like money, destruction, or revenge, him seemed to operate on a completely different level, a level where nothing physical is sought. What he wants is to corrupt, to generate suffering, to destabilize the very essence of good. But there's something very curious. His design completely deviates from the aesthetic of all the other characters. Red skin, black eyes, green pupils, long claws, a slim body, feminine clothing, high-heeled boots, and a voice that blends deep and high tones, as if two entities were speaking at once. Was this just an artistic choice, or an intentional representation of something much darker? It's no wonder that many symbolism scholars see him as a clear representation of the devil archetype itself. And not just the devil of Christian tradition, but a malevolent entity that appears across multiple cultures. A figure without a defined gender, who manipulates, who hides in the shadows, and who acts through mental corruption, fear, and emotional imbalance. In fact, just pay attention to the type of power him wields within the series. Unlike the other villains, who rely on brute force, technology, or elaborate plans, him operates psychologically. He infiltrates emotions, thoughts, creates illusions, distorts reality, controls minds, and in some episodes, he even breaks the fourth wall, interfering directly with the perception of the show's own universe. And this raises an unsettling question. If him has enough power to alter the very reality of that world, what guarantees that he's simply a villain and not a primordial entity that was there before everything? Another detail few have noticed is the constant presence of very specific sound effects every time him appears. Deep bass sounds, distortion noises, reversed whispers, and in some episodes, if you isolate the audio, you can hear disconnected words, almost like distorted chants. Coincidence? Or a deliberate sonic signature from the creators to reinforce this supernatural aura? And it doesn't stop there. The place where him resides also completely escapes the logic of other settings in the show. An underground space filled with red fog, constant echoes, with no defined walls, no ceiling, as if it's a place outside of time and space. Something that resembles descriptions of infernal realms in occult traditions, far more than any physical location in Townsville. But there's more. When we analyze the chronology of the episodes, a sinister pattern emerges. Him starts appearing more frequently and with greater strength after the creation of the Powerpuff Girls. Before that, there's no record of him. And this raises a serious doubt. Is him's appearance directly connected to the activation of Chemical X? Could it be that, in fact, he didn't exist until that experiment happened? It sounds absurd, but if we look from this angle, everything starts to make sense. Because if Chemical X is truly a physical extension of an entity, the breaking of the vial wouldn't have just created the girls. It would also have broken a barrier, released something that was contained, something that, until then, could not manifest. And here's something curious. The color palette that defines him is identical to that of Chemical X. Red, black, green, and purple. And every time he appears, that same dense, dark smoke we saw in the girl's creation scene also manifests. Does that really seem like a coincidence to you? And so, that chilling question remains. What if him isn't simply a villain? What if he's actually the conscious materialization of the energy that created the girls? A kind of dark side, inevitably connected to them? If that's the case, what, in fact, was created in that laboratory? And did Professor Utonium know? Or did he simply have no idea what door he was opening? When you look at the figure of Professor Utonium in the series, he is always portrayed as a kind, dedicated, almost naive man. But there's one thing that was never truly explored. How exactly did he reach the point of trying to create a daughter in a laboratory? Because as fantastical as the premise of the show is, that decision doesn't sound like something casual. What many people don't know is that there's an episode where the professor himself, in a brief moment, mentions that he spent years trying to fill a void. A detail that, at the time, was treated as something comedic, but when reviewed under a new perspective, sounds more like a veiled confession of someone willing to cross any line. And here comes a theory that, while uncomfortable, is starting to gain traction. Some pop culture researchers argue that the professor didn't find Chemical X, he received it, and that this gift was actually the result of an agreement. A silent pact, something that was never spoken, but is hidden within the details of the narrative itself. One of those details appears precisely in the symbolism of the professor's laboratory. Have you ever noticed how, in several episodes, there are circles drawn on the floor, geometric diagrams, lines that, to an inattentive eye, seem like simple decoration? But if you compare these drawings to symbols from ancient grimoires, you quickly realize that they are extremely similar to summoning seals. And the coincidence goes further. The vial of Chemical X itself carries a strange mark that is never explained in the show. A kind of inverted spiral crossed by two lines. Do you know where this symbol also appears? In medieval manuscripts, specifically in the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum, one of the oldest books of European demonology. There, this seal represents a contract, a permission for the manifestation of entities. If you still think this could be just an artistic coincidence, then maybe this next detail will make you reconsider. There's a scrapped script, released years later, where the origin of Chemical X would have been revealed. In it, Professor Utonium visits an antique shop and acquires a book with no title. From that book, he conducts experiments that ultimately lead to the creation of the vial. This episode was never produced, but the script exists, and today it circulates in obscure forums on the internet. And if you think all this still feels like a stretch, there's more. In the episode Tough Love, him casts a curse that makes all the citizens of Townsville hate the girls. And when the spell is broken, pay attention to the professor's expression. He doesn't look surprised by what happened. In fact, he seems to understand very well the kind of power that was at play. A subtle, almost imperceptible reaction. But once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Another clue appears in the relationship between him and the professor himself. Have you noticed that, in several episodes, him never directly targets Utonium? He always focuses on the girls, the city, people's emotions, but never on the man who, theoretically, is responsible for the existence of all this. Strange, isn't it? And this raises a dark hypothesis. Could it be that, at some point, the professor and him sealed an agreement? Not a traditional pact, but an unspoken contract, a silent exchange. I grant you power, you give me something in return. And if that's the case, what exactly did the professor offer? The question becomes even more uncomfortable when we remember that, in Townsville's own universe, there are never any similar experiments. No other scientist, no other character, ever deals with anything remotely like this. Chemical X isn't replicated, isn't studied, isn't shared. It's unique, singular, as if it were something forbidden. And now stop and think, if all this is true, what was Utonium really trying to create? Was he truly seeking the perfect daughter? Or was he, deep down, trying to harness a power he didn't even understand? And more importantly, was that power ever truly under his control? The creation of the girls was the visible side of this experiment, but what was left on the other side of that pact? If everything up to this point already feels uncomfortably strange, just wait until you start noticing the signs scattered throughout the episodes themselves. Because as subtle as they may seem, once you notice them, you simply can't ignore them anymore. They're there, all the time. and the first sign appears precisely in the behavior of the girls. Have you ever noticed how, despite being presented as figures of good, there are moments when something inside them simply loses control? Episodes where they completely snap, acting with a rage that doesn't match the idea of being innocent child heroes. A classic example is the episode Bubblevicious. In it, Bubbles, who is always the sweetest one, undergoes a transformation that borders on possession. She develops overwhelming strength, her expression changes, her eyes darken, and for a few seconds, she stops being the adorable heroine we know. Does that seem like just an exaggeration, or a momentary manifestation of something that lives hidden within them? And it's not an isolated case. There are other episodes where Blossom and Buttercup also display behavior that crosses any reasonable line. Fits of rage, wildly disproportionate reactions, and even moments where it seems like they lose their own consciousness. If we look at this objectively, it doesn't seem like just a writing flaw. It looks like a symptom. Now pay attention to another detail, the dreams. Yes, the dream sequences that appear in several episodes. Many times, these dreams are presented as comedic or absurd, but if you pause and analyze the elements that show up in them, the scenario changes completely. Distorted landscapes, creatures with demonic forms, disconnected voices, symbols in the background that flash for just seconds before disappearing. Does that really seem like just a writer's joke? And speaking of symbols, there are episodes where almost subliminally, drawings appear that resemble pentagrams, all-seeing eyes, inverted spirals, and even inscriptions in strange languages that, when translated, refer to words like control, power, and awakening. And all of this is hidden in the background, on a wall, in the lab, or on random objects no one pays attention to. Another episode that raises a lot of suspicion is Custody Battle, where him directly tries to gain custody of the girls. Think about the symbolism, a being that represents absolute evil, fighting for direct control over them. Isn't it strange that, within the narrative, this dispute is never treated with the gravity it should deserve? And it's not just him that has these connections. There's an episode called Paranoia, where the girls face their worst fears, but the fears materialize in an extremely specific way. Entities that resemble demonic figures, shadows with red eyes, and even distortions of the girls' own bodies. Is that just a representation of fear, or a reflection of what truly lives inside them? Now notice a pattern. Every time the girls lose control, have power surges, or are put in situations where the line between good and evil gets blurry, the same soundtrack plays. A deep, muffled sound, followed by reversed whispers and a faint metallic noise, almost imperceptible. This isn't just aesthetic. It's a sound signature that always accompanies the manifestation of this energy. And curiously, notice how Professor Utonium reacts in those moments. He never seems surprised, never acts like someone who's witnessing something abnormal. On the contrary, his expression is often that of someone who knows exactly what's happening, almost as if he's aware, and even expecting, that these manifestations could occur. Another little discussed point is the episodes that involve time distortions and alternate realities. In several of them, when something disrupts the timeline, corrupted versions of the girls appear, darker, with cold expressions, violent behavior, as if, without the professor's direct influence, their true essence comes to the surface. And then comes the question that's impossible to ignore. Were all these things put there as jokes, as irony, as part of the humor style? Or are they, in fact, small reminders left by the creators? Subtle clues that there is indeed a much larger duality behind these characters? If that's the case, what exactly are these clues trying to warn us about? And more importantly, is the dark side of the Powerpuff Girls truly asleep, or just waiting for the right moment to awaken? When we start connecting all these dots, an inevitable question arises. What would the real consequences of something like this be? After all, if the origin of the Powerpuff Girls' powers truly carries a connection to an entity like him, and if Chemical X is more than just a compound, then there's no way this goes unnoticed in the universe they live in. And interestingly, there are situations in the show that seem to reflect exactly that, but always disguised, almost masked as humor or exaggeration. It's as if the writers wanted to show the side effects of this pact, without ever saying it out loud. Think about the episodes where the entire city seems to collapse in illogical ways, where chaos erupts without any plausible explanation. Townsville, despite having a history of villains, experiences destruction on levels that far surpass anything reasonable for a normal city. There's a constant imbalance in that place, as if an invisible presence is always lurking, keeping the environment in an endless cycle of chaos and reconstruction. Now look at the city's own inhabitants. Have you noticed that in several episodes, people display absurdly extreme behaviors? Mass panic, explosions of anger, actions that border on hysteria, and then it's all treated as if nothing ever happened. Does that seem like just a running joke, or a symptom that the entire city is somehow under the influence of an energy that should never have been unleashed? It's also interesting to notice the psychological wear on the girls themselves. They were created to protect the city, but in practice, they live in a constant state of combat. They're called upon at any hour, in any situation, with no rest, no personal life. And when they show signs of stress, imbalance, or even emotional breakdowns, it's always treated as part of the comedy. But if we look at it from another angle, it suddenly doesn't seem that funny anymore. There's also a sinister pattern in the episodes where they face threats of unknown origin. Whenever the enemy doesn't have a physical form but appears as an entity, a shadow, a distortion, the girls seem much more vulnerable, as if this kind of threat isn't just external, but somehow directly connected to their own essence. And the relationship with him becomes increasingly strange when we observe that, in many moments, he doesn't show up to destroy, but rather to test, provoke, emotionally challenge. As if his goal was never to win, but to maintain a constant influence, a kind of bond that cannot be broken. Another detail that doesn't go unnoticed is that in episodes where the girls reach extreme peaks of power, there's always an invisible consequence. The environment changes, the soundtrack becomes heavier, the sky darkens, and even the episode's color palette shifts. Everything becomes colder, darker. As if, in that moment, something from the other side was crossing the barrier of reality. And if that weren't enough, in episodes that involve time travel or parallel realities, the pattern repeats. Versions of the girls that are corrupted, darker, with cold expressions, violent behavior. Whenever there's a rupture in the normal timeline, the result is collapse. Does that really seem like just a narrative device, or a glimpse of what would happen if this fragile balance were truly broken? It's almost as if the universe of Townsville were a reality held together by very thin threads, and those threads are actually the containment of a force that was never meant to be there. And the most unsettling realization is that maybe these consequences aren't exceptions in the show, but rather the rule disguised as humor and adventure. Now stop and reflect. If all of this is only the effects we can see on the surface, what might be happening in the deeper layers of this universe? What kind of distortion, what kind of rupture, keeps happening, invisible to the characters' eyes, but completely evident to those who choose to look beyond the surface? And most importantly, if this force was truly released in that laboratory, could it ever be contained again? What first seemed like just a fun story about child superheroes reveals, when observed more closely, a complex web of symbolism, hidden messages, and unsettling connections. The origin of the Powerpuff Girls, the mystery of Chemical X, and the disturbing presence of him create a scenario where it's hard to believe that all of this is merely the result of coincidence or the playful creativity of the writers. Whether all of this is simply part of a theory, or if there's something more behind these episodes, we may never know for sure. This story is just one piece, and maybe one day, you'll see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. And don't forget to share it, because more voices mean more discoveries.